What's good? It's Woog. Canelo Alvarez defeated John Ryder via unanimous decision. The three judges' scorecards were 120 to 107, and then two of the cards had it 118, 109, meaning one of the three judges gave Canelo all of the rounds, plus Canelo scored that one knockdown in the fifth round. And, to be honest, when I saw that knockdown in the fifth, I thought it was only a matter of time before Canelo got the stoppage. So props to John Ryder for making it the 12-round distance here. This was obviously Canelo's homecoming in Guadalajara, Mexico, his first time fighting in Mexico in the past 12 years. And Canelo wanted to deliver that knockout. And there was another questionable, could have been called a knockdown incident, but the referee ruled that their feet got tangled, and that's what led to the knockdown. I think I saw on Instagram, Barack the Boxing Bully from the DAZN boxing show said that second one should have been called a knockdown. But I want to talk just a little bit about this fight and about what it means for Canelo's immediate future. And by immediate, I mean his next two fights. It looks like him versus Dimitri Bivol in their rematch is going to be next. If they can make that fight, Dimitri Bivol's insisting that the fight takes place in Canelo's division where he holds all the belts at 168. And we know that Canelo is hell-bent on making this fight at 175, the same as its predecessor, because Canelo wants all of the conditions of the first fight to be replicated in the rematch because, at least one of the theories, and you hear Eddie Hearn talking about this because he's representing Canelo in this as well, is that people won't give Canelo the credit if he drains Dimitri Bivol down to 168 and fights him in that way. And I question whether Dimitri Bivol can effectively do it. I know that he's saying that that's what he wants to do. I know that earlier in Bivol's WBA title reign, he was seen to be a smaller light heavyweight. And the idea was that if he really wanted to, that he could fight at 168. But this was Dimitri Bivol in his late 20s. Now he's in his early to close to mid 30s. And so I am less sure that Bivol at 32 would be able to do it as easily as we think that he might have been able to do it a few years ago. So we'll see how those negotiations play out, and we'll see if Canelo in fact runs that back versus him going against David Benavidez, which I believe most fight fans, including myself, would love to see next, is Canelo defending all of his belts at 168 versus David Benavidez. But in this fight against John Ryder, there was variance in the scorecards. Only one of the three judges gave Canelo all of the rounds. I think that 10 rounds to 2 would have been the most appropriate scorecard. And even then, you've got a couple of swing rounds that you would be giving to John Ryder towards the end of the fight. So the 12th round seems to be a round that one of the three official judges gave to John Ryder, and I saw that Boxing Scene's unofficial scorecard gave the 12th round to Ryder as well. I think the 10th round is a round that two of the three official judges gave to John Ryder. So the 10th and the 12th seem to be the rounds that most people think that John Ryder could have edged. And then I saw that one of the judges gave the 11th round to John Ryder. I think that the Boxing Scene or one of the other judges gave the 9th round and the 8th round, respectively, to John Ryder. And it's interesting because I thought that Canelo definitely banked the first 7 rounds, but Chris Mannix's on the DAZN broadcast going into the 7th round, Chris Mannix already had John Ryder winning 2 rounds against Canelo, which I didn't see how you could give John Ryder 2 of the first 6 rounds, because if you could do that and you could make an argument for a couple of those late rounds, those swing rounds to go John Ryder's way, well, then you could start talking about conceivably having a scorecard of 8 rounds to 4 or even 7 rounds to 5, which sounds crazy. Again, I think the 10 rounds to 2 is most reflective of the fight that I saw, or at least the fight that I thought I saw. So what did we see? We saw Canelo mostly winning the first half of the fight, and we saw the second half of the fight being a lot more back and forth action-packed. I was surprised by John Ryder's ability to counter Canelo effectively. I was also surprised by John Ryder's ability to not get countered disastrously versus Canelo. This wasn't a catch and shoot Canelo, which kind of bothers me if you consider, his skill set when he's at his absolute best. Canelo is somebody who can counterpunch you with extreme sharpness. And I thought that some of that was lacking, especially in the second half of the fight. So this is starting to become a little bit of a trend where Canelo, even when he's trying to put his foot on the gas in the second half of the fight, it just seems like he is lacking the defense. In the second half of the fight, we saw Triple G in their trilogy fight hit Canelo a lot more in the last few rounds. We saw John Ryder certainly hitting Canelo a lot more in the last few rounds. And maybe that's because Canelo was trying to march forward and trying to deliver that knockout for his home crowd. But again, you've got to give John Ryder the credit for being so durable, especially after that knockdown and after he got bloodied up pretty badly in the third round. They were saying that it was by a Canelo right hand that bloodied him up, but I'm less sure because it looked like the right hand they were talking about kind of went up off of John Ryder's head. It didn't look like it smashed directly into his nose, but he got bloodied up in that third round. He got knocked down in the fifth round, and then he had a bit of a rally in the last few rounds. Although if you look at the CompuBox numbers, it's not exactly reflective of that. Like, I'm just going to let you know how many punches John Ryder landed in the first half of the fight versus the second half of the fight, because when I was watching the fight, I was under the impression that John Ryder was in fact landing more punches on Canelo in the second half of the fight, not landing more punches than Canelo was landing on him, but landing more punches on Canelo than he was landing on Canelo in the first half of the fight. But round by round, Ryder's punch landed against Canelo was 5 punches in the first, 5 in the second, 10 in the third, 5 punches landed in the fourth, 8 in the fifth, 6 in the sixth. Then in the second half of the fight, it was 7 in the seventh, 7 in the eighth, 9 in the ninth, 5 in the 10th, and that was supposed to be one of Ryder's best rounds, yet he, at least according to CompuBox, landed only 5 punches in that 10th round, 6 punches in the 11th, 7 punches in the 12th. So no, at least according to CompuBox, he was not landing more. So it's either these are inaccurate or we were just getting way too excited every time John Ryder did something in the second half of the fight. I don't know which of these is true, but I was expecting to see more of a discrepancy of Ryder's punches landed in the second half of the fight, especially in those last few rounds, than was taking place in the first half of the fight. But no, the stats don't seem to reflect that. So what's going on here? Is it that Canelo was looking so tired in the last few rounds where you just see him just looking a little more exhausted? He seems a little more predictable with his punch selection, with his punch output, where his trap setting isn't as good. Again, his counter punching isn't as devastating, where it's like you make a move and then I make a counter move to make you pay for that move. You don't see as much of that in the last few rounds. And again, it might be because Canelo's hunting John Ryder and not respecting Ryder's power, so he's willing to take a few to give a few. I wonder how Canelo's surgically repaired left, it was his left wrist that he had the surgery on, not surgically repaired necessarily, but surgically operated left wrist. It was like cartilage in his left wrist, correct? It wasn't like a hand injury in the way that it was back in 2016 when Canelo had that surgery after his fight against Liam Smith. So Canelo had an actual right hand surgery in 2016. This one was, I believe, his left wrist, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. I wonder how his left hand was feeling. He seemed to be throwing it like he was jabbing pretty effectively. And it's not like there was an actual reduction or decrease in Canelo's punch output in the second half of the fight. He was basically throwing as many punches as he was in the first half of the fight. So why is it that we're looking at this fight? Not that it's a tale of two fights, because Canelo, to me, was still winning the majority of the rounds in the second half of the fight. It just looked like there was a spirit about John Ryder's approach that looked like he was having more success against Canelo. I was also impressed by John Ryder's ability to keep the fight at or near the center of the ring. So one thing you can't afford if you're tiring against Canelo is to find yourself trapped up against the ropes and letting Canelo let his hands go. That's what happened eventually to Caleb Plant. That's what happened to Sergey Kovalev late in their fight. You can't have that happen. And John Ryder didn't let that happen. He still kept it near the middle of the ring. So props to him for that. He really held his own here. And again, I thought that he actually was countering Canelo pretty well. Again, this is relatively and comparatively speaking, because once again, the stats don't bear that John Ryder was hitting Canelo a ton in the second half of the fight. But watching this, there was something about Canelo looking like he was moving in mud a little bit more in those last few rounds. Again, you knew that he wanted to put his foot on the gas to deliver on that knockout. So it's not like John Ryder was backing up and was, making Canelo chase him or was, doing a bunch of tying up. Like he wasn't Caleb Plant fighting David Benavidez in the second half of their fight, where Caleb Plant, in order to survive the fight, had to move a ton and had to hold a ton. No, John Ryder was pretty much in striking range and was boxing Canelo through the second half of the fight and was just too durable to get stopped in this fight. And, I was really hoping that they did not stop this fight in a kind of ceremonious way, like they did when they stopped Carlos Takam against Anthony Joshua late in the fight to almost seemingly give AJ the stoppage. I didn't want it to be a scenario here with Canelo and Ryder where Canelo starts landing some punches in the 11th or 12th round and then the ref jumps in and says, no, he's had enough. So it looks like Canelo delivered the knockout. He could jump up on the ropes and celebrate to his fans that he got the stoppage. I wanted this to be a situation where if Canelo got the stoppage, that it was a stoppage that he in fact earned. And John Ryder just was not giving him that in this case. So what does that mean against, Dimitri Bivol, if that is Canelo's next fight? I would have to believe that most fight fans don't think or can't picture Canelo beating Dimitri Bivol, especially if there is a little something missing from the fastball and there is a little something missing from the reflexes and something missing from perhaps the sweet science sharpness in the second half of fights for Canelo these days. He seems like he's not moving his head as quickly. Remember the way that he was avoiding Daniel Jacobs' jab in certain rounds of their fight where he, had the upper body and trunk and torso and head movement where he was able to look at punches thrown and make them miss on the fly just with his reflexes and his ability to dodge. I don't see that as much, especially when he starts tiring in these recent fights. And again, if there is something missing from the fastball, it's just hard to picture Canelo. Like, I don't see him being the favorite in this rematch against Dimitri Bivol. Now, against David Benavidez, I would have to imagine that Canelo would still be a slight favorite, even if you hear most fight fans, or at least a substantial portion of fight fans saying that they think David Benavidez wins that fight. Look, I think that this fight against Ryder, even though Canelo won almost every round, and again, this is how boxing works. You can win damn near every round, if not every round, and still people say, yeah, there's something slipping in Canelo. Like this is just one of those sports. And if there is even a slight degradation, man, that's something that could show itself against a fighter as dangerous and unforgiving and as durable and as high volume as David Benavidez. Like, what happens if Canelo, come the 7th or 8th round, starts looking like he looked against John Ryder, but against David Benavidez? And again, it's not like we saw Canelo wobbled in this fight. Like Canelo, unless you look at, way back when he fought Miguel Cotto's brother, I haven't seen other cases of Canelo getting kind of jelly-legged or looking unsteady on his feet. Let me know if you've seen different. Maybe there were a couple moments in one of those first two Triple G fights where Canelo looked like visibly rocked, but not anything where it's like, whoa, Canelo, is he able to keep balance? You don't see Canelo in a lot of those situations. And I almost feel like Canelo's like anatomically, built, and it just in his DNA, he's got like a jawline and a neck that is able to absorb punches. That's just one of those attributes that you would like to have as a boxer, a thicker neck versus a thinner neck and a wide jaw. So again, it's not like Canelo was hurt against John Ryder. It just looked like he had difficulty getting his most damaging offense off effectively in the last few rounds and was kind of unable to separate himself as demonstratively as we've seen him do it in the past. And remember back in the day, there was a little reputation on Canelo that he did take big portions off of rounds and that he did tire in big moments, or, when I say big moments, I mean like in long stretches during the second half of fights. So some of this is not entirely new, but it just seems like it's been a long time prior to these last couple, 2 or 3 fights where we saw Canelo just looking unimpressive in the last few rounds. Now, granted, there were the 2 Triple G fights, the first two Triple G fights where Triple G seemingly fought Canelo at least evenly in both of those fights, right? But if you look at the way that he finished against Caleb Plant, the way that he finished again against Sergey Kovalev, and, he broke Billy Joe Saunders' eye in the middle round. So that was in late in the fight. And, maybe he did kind of start to tire a bit against Callum Smith in retrospect. I mean, he won almost every round of that fight as well. That was, to me, one of his most impressive performances in his career against Callum Smith. But yeah, against Dimitri Bivol, I suspect that there are more people suspicious about Canelo's chances today than they were even just a couple of days ago. This was supposed to be a fight for Canelo where it kind of reestablishes how much of a badass he really is. And yes, again, he did win just about all the rounds against a very durable and tough and inspired, motivated John Ryder. Remember John Ryder, when he went down in the 5th round, he looked at his corner almost like he had a decision to make. And he made the decision to fight, straight up. He made the decision to fight, and he fought in a valiant and spirited way, like he was looking to win the fight, even in those championship rounds. So, yeah, this was a pretty exciting fight. It was interesting to see. And, yeah, I do think that it's going to beg more questions on how good Canelo is likely to be in his next 1 to 2 fights. I mean, the guy's had more than 60 professional fights, so you just wonder if this is currently catching up with him. If they do make that fight against Dimitri Bivol, boy, something dramatic would have to happen for Canelo to win that fight, especially at 175. I don't like Canelo's chances at beating Bivol at 175. I like his chances more at 168. But boy, if you lose that 168 one, that one is arguably more legacy damaging than it would be to lose the rematch at 175 again. And I think that motivation is one of the reasons why Dimitri Bivol's insisting, hey, no, let me track you down in your turf, in your stomping grounds, and take all your belts from you at 168. That kind of gets everybody saying, oh, word? I don't know which I would rather that rematch to take place at 175 or 168. Let me know which division you would like to see that rematch take place in. And then against David Benavidez, boy, it's hard to picture what would go down in the second half of the fight as David Benavidez's volume tends to go up, and Canelo, well, we saw what we got out of Canelo in the last 5 rounds against Ryder here. I just don't know what that looks like against somebody, because again, John Ryder is about 5'9", close to Canelo's height. So when John Ryder is in striking range, Canelo's in striking range. But against David Benavidez, he's able to control range a little bit more. And you just wonder what Canelo would do. And granted, David Benavidez does not box like Dimitri Bivol in terms of his distance control and in terms of his defense. But it would be on Canelo to close the gap and to start hitting the 6'2", 6'3" Benavidez in the late rounds. And it just, I don't know if Canelo's got the legs to hang with Benavidez in the last 4 to 5 rounds of a 12-rounder. But you would think that Canelo would still be a slight betting favorite against Benavidez. So again, I hope that that's the fight that they make, but it looks like Canelo is hell-bent on getting his get back against Dimitri Bivol, which, I mean, we might not see Canelo versus David Benavidez depending on how that Canelo versus Dimitri Bivol fight goes down. Like, if Canelo loses the rematch to Bivol, does he just say, okay, and then continue and then, go back to 168 and defend all of his belts against Benavidez? Canelo just seems like he's so prideful, so wanting to make statement after statement after statement that he's putting all of his chips in this rematch against Dimitri Bivol. I just don't see him being able to reignite the motivation to be at his 100% best and to train at his 100% best if he loses the rematch against Dimitri Bivol. So it's going to be interesting to kind of forecast and to see how this next negotiation against Bivol, how that all goes down to determine what Canelo ends up doing in, I suspect, September, right? And I would like to hear an update on the state of Canelo's hand and wrist, his left. I want to see if he is in fact, healthy enough to go right back into, Mexican Independence Day in September and have that next 2023 fight. But yeah, let me know what you thought of the Canelo versus Ryder fight. And let me know what you think should be next for Canelo and what you think, in fact, will be next for Canelo, and how you think each or either of those matchups would pan out for Canelo. And also, how many rounds did you give John Ryder in this fight? Again, I think that 2 would have been the best call. You can make an argument for 3. 4, you would really be stretching it for 4. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments and like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.